Greetings and welcome, gentles and ladiesmen. It's time for another installment of Remake or Rebreak, where we compare classics and the remake side by side to see which is better and why. When I first began ROR, I examined the 5 classic Mario games of the NES and SNES days, and compared them to their portable versions of the early 2000s. This time around, I want to give the analogous games in the Sonic the Hedgehog series the same treatment. The 5 classic Sonic games for the Sega Genesis and Sega CD are considered by many to be some of the best platforming games ever made. While I may not have grown up with these games like I did the Mario Advance remakes, I've given them plenty of playthroughs over the past 4 years and have come to understand why they have been and remain so popular among the Sonic fanbase, for better or for worse. Considering the omnipresent lasting appeal of these 5 titles, I think it's worth comparing them to their recent re-releases on iOS and Android. Over the next couple of months or so, we're going to be looking at the mobile phone versions of Sonic 1, Sonic 2, and Sonic CD for iOS and Android. I've got a lot to say, so let's jump right in. Following the release of the 16-bit Sega Mega Drive in 1989, or Sega Genesis for my fellow North Americans, Sega was gaining ground but still struggling to compete with the monolithic 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System. Seeing the marketing success of Nintendo franchises like The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, and mascot Super Mario, Sega decided it was high time that they rebranded. Up to this point, Sega's mascot was an elf with a Jufro named Alex Kidd, who had a handful of games in the Sega Master System as well as a title on the Genesis. Don't remember him? Well, neither do I. The artists at Sega drew up a number of different protagonists for a new series of games, including this caricature of Theodore Roosevelt who'd go on to become the series villain. A scribbling on a napkin of a character named Mr. Needlemouse convinced the team that a hedgehog would be their best bet. With the blue recoloring, longer head spikes, and the addition of Michael Jackson-esque sneakers, Sega's new mascot, Sonic the Hedgehog, was born. To separate Sonic from other platforming mascots of his time, Sega's Sonic team decided to put the Mega Drive's advanced processor to good use, and emphasize speed as Sonic's signature ability. The game was released to such critical and commercial success that it brought Sega neck and neck with Nintendo. With some much lauded follow-ups in the Genesis and Sega CD, Sonic the Hedgehog would go on to become one of the most iconic video game characters in the 90s and beyond. Sonic's history beyond the Genesis era has been shaky. The classic era, which began in 1991 and ended in 1998, is considered by many fans to be the best in the series. Including such titles as Sonic 1, 2, CD, and 3 and Knuckles, the classic era's fast and furious side-scrolling gameplay continues to entertain retro enthusiasts to this very day. The Dreamcast era, which began in 1998 and ended in 2005, includes such titles as Sonic Adventure, Sonic Adventure 2, and Sonic Heroes. While the Dreamcast era was somewhat well received for its time, fans and critics have been more negative in retrospect, believing the series' foray into 3D to have departed from many of the elements that made the classic so great. Following Sonic Heroes came the ominously named Dark Age of Sonic, which began in 2005 and ended in 2010. Characterized by a consistently mixed to negative critical reception, the Dark Age ranges from love-it-hate-it Sonic Unleashed, to the much-despised Shadow the Hedgehog, to meh Sonic and the Black Knight, to one of the most infamously bad games of all time, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Around the release of Shadow in 2006, many people gave up hope on the franchise, while a weakened and divided fanbase continued to hold out for the next great Sonic game. And in 2010, the Dark Age was ended by what many heralded as the best Sonic game in years, Sonic Colors for the Nintendo Wii. My personal favorite game in the series, Colors offered excellent graphics, amazing music, superb level design, and a genuinely funny and entertaining story. 2011 Sonic Generations kept spirits floating high, and is considered by many fans to be the best 3D game in the series. While 2013 Sonic Lost World wasn't as well received as Generations or Colors, it's still considered better than most games in the Dark Age or the Dreamcast era. And then there's Sonic Boom. I already released a 32-minute long video talking about this one, so if you want to know more, go check that out. The shakiness of the past 20-some years has left the fanbase divided over what model of Sonic game design works best and why. Fans of the classic era games, the classicus, prefer the original 2D platforming gameplay style of the early 90s, and can vary in their opinions on newer entries. Some, like the great Clement, have a deep love for the classics, but can get enjoyment out of newer 2D and 3D Sonic games alike. provided that they're well designed and fun to play. Others have given up on the series and believe that it hasn't been any good since 1994's Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Fans of the Dreamcast era games, whom I call the Dreamcastians, love the more story-driven, multi-charactered 3D platforming action of Sonic Adventure 1, 2, and Sonic Heroes above all else, though their views of past and future games aren't as dead set. They also seem to display the greatest degree of toleration for titles from the Dark Age. Fans who really get a kick out of Renaissance-era titles like Colors and Generations make up the modernists. Seeing as the Sonic fanbase has become divided more and more by preference for what has worked in the past, the modernists are a rare breed, either having converted from the other two groups or having gotten into the franchise within the past few years. Additionally, there are the non-fans, who are at best ambivalent about Sonic and at worst among the loudest and most hateful actors in the entire Sonic community. Within the past 10 years or so, I've become rather disenchanted with the Sonic fanbase, especially the more biased and hateful classicist Dreamcastians and non-fans who never cease to get on Sega's case over the most trivial and inconsequential of things. The only thing equaling their sheer unwillingness to give modern Sonic a sliver of a fair chance is their over-glorification of the classics on Genesis and Sega CD. The classics are good games, and I have absolutely no intention of saying anything to the contrary. I also don't deny that a lot of the games released between 1998 and 2010 were far from great. And while I sincerely believe that the 5 classic games are of a higher quality standard than a great many of the 3D games, I also believe that the classics are imperfect just as any game is imperfect. Like any Sonic game ever, the classics have flaws. Not nearly as many as the Dark Age games, mind you, but flaws nonetheless. In this marathon, I hope to highlight not only what makes these games great, but also the few things that are not so great. The things that classicists seem to conveniently forget about when nitpicking the shit out of modern Sonic games. With that out of the way, let's get into Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis and its remake on iOS and Android. The plot is quite simple. Sonic is a fun-loving hedgehog who lives on South Island with his adorable little animal buddies. All is peaceful until Sonic's arch-nemesis, a maniacal scientist named Dr. Ivo Eggman Robotnik, scoops up his animal buddies and encapsulates them in robotic badniks to help him hunt down the 6 mystical Chaos Emeralds and take over the world. Sonic, seeing that his friends have gone missing, sets out to confront the Doctor, secure the Chaos Emeralds, and free his buddies. A little more complicated than Mario, but not by too terribly much. And this will probably be a shock to nobody, but from a character perspective, I really do get a kick out of the Blue Blur. His fun-loving attitude and cheesy one-liners always bring a smile to my face. As you might imagine, he's not particularly well developed in this first game, seeing as the story is pretty minimalistic, but once we jump into 3D, I'll have quite a bit more to say. I will say that I think Sonic's Dreamcast and Renaissance designs fit the character a lot better. In the newer games, Sonic's got more fitting proportions and is depicted running at high speeds with a shit-eating grin on his face. That's the fun-loving Sonic we all know and love. I just don't get the same vibe from his squat, angry little chibi design, but that's just my personal opinion. It's still perfectly fine. And then there's the loveliness that is Dr. Ivo Eggman Robotnik. I fucking love this guy. He's up there with Hades and Dr. Nefarious, one of my favorite video game villains of all time. Just look at that goofy smile and that ridiculous mustache. You know you love him too. What's also neat is that the good doctor is what Dr. Evil might call a hands-on evil genius. Each of the boss encounters pits Sonic against the Doctor in one of his maniacal machines. None of them are really that challenging, but there's definitely a greater variety here than there was in classic Mario. Like with Sonic, I prefer his modern military jacket getup, but his obese chibi design still fits him perfectly fine. And now to address the elephant in the room. Starting with Sonic Adventure, he started going by his Japanese name, Dr. Eggman. Seeing as he had been called Robotnik overseas in the games, comics, and on TV for about 7 years, this change was understandably met with some backlash. Nowadays, there's somewhat of a huge split in the Euro-American fanbase, with one side arguing for Robotnik and the other for Eggman. That's strange, seeing as nobody gave a rat's furry ass when Princess Toadstool suddenly adopted her Japanese name in Super Mario 64, and the Mario fanbase didn't implode, but I digress. So where does my loyalty lie? Eggman all the way, baby, and I have my reasons. But in the interest of fairness, I'll do the classicists a solid and refer to him as Robotnik until we get to Sonic Adventure. Let's get into dem aesthetics. For a 1991 Genesis title, Sonic 1 is a good-looking game. The environments are oozing with color and detail, and the parallax backgrounds allow for a nice depth of field that really brings the game to life. I also really enjoyed the art direction. It's got more of an anime edge to it than, say, Mario, with soft curved characters and gradated colors. Visually, I can't find much to complain about here. The Genesis version still looks great, and the mobile version looks even better, with a 1080p resolution at a silky smooth 60 frames per second, with the original 4x3 image given a 16:9 facelift. The same great sprite art we know and love is still here to be enjoyed, and because of the greater visibility, I find that the game actually plays smoother than the Genesis version. Before I get into the music, I'd better start off by saying that the Genesis sound font is not my favorite. I much prefer the genre and instrument variety of the Super Nintendo to the Genesis's raunchy symphony of robotic farts. Okay, maybe that's an unfair generalization. Not all Genesis music is bad, nor does it all sound like robotic farts. The Genesis, like any other classic console, delivers its fair share of legendarily awesome tunes. And when talented composers like Yuzo Koshiro or Howard Drawson take the stage, they can produce some truly great stuff that really pushes the system's limitations. I consider the Streets of Rage trilogy the epitome of Genesis music, but Sonic is no slouch either. I enjoy just about every track in Sonic 1. Except Labyrinth Zone. What is that twangy ting instrument supposed to be? An acoustic guitar? My ears are gonna throw up. As for tracks like Green Hill Zone, Marble Zone, or my personal favorite Starlight Zone, it's clear that composer Masato Nakamura really knew his way around the Genesis' sound chip. While you opine that Sonic music wouldn't truly earn its legendary reputation until 1998's Sonic Adventure, Sonic 1's soundtrack is still pretty damn good. As far as the remake goes, I would have liked it if there could have been an arranged soundtrack in addition to the original Genesis tunes, but the remastered sound is good enough. On to det gameplay. Sonic's adventure across South Island will take him through 6 different zones, each consisting of 3 acts. I've always thought that terminology was pretty unique. In any other game ever, they're usually called worlds or stages or something, but in Sonic they're called zones and acts. As Sonic, you've got to navigate your way through each act, destroying robotic badniks and collecting rings along the way. At the end of each zone, you face off with one of Dr. Robotnik's mechs and free a capsule full of your animal buddies. The acts are also dotted with power-ups that you can nab to get extra lives or shields or protect you from enemies. Control-wise, it's as minimalistic as it gets. D-pad moves, A, B, and C jump, and if you move and press down, Sonic will do a spin attack, curling into a ball and destroying anything in his path. When it comes to control, Sonic handles pretty well. His jumps may feel too floaty for some, but I find that it makes it easier to land my jumps. Even though you'll usually be jumping on enemies to kill them, a nice difference between Sonic and Mario is that Sonic can jump into enemies from any angle. As long as he's in a ball and not touching spikes, killing enemies is a breeze. The mechanics may be kinda basic, but they work, and they work well. The mobile version introduces a touch gamepad control scheme, and while I'm ambivalent about touch controls in general, I think they're implemented pretty well in this game. Because of Sonic's simple control scheme, you only really have to keep track of a D-pad and a single button. Additionally, you're given the ability to customize the size, opacity, and placement of the touch buttons to suit your fancy. So no matter what, you'll find something that works for you. And if you still can't get into it, you can always buy a Bluetooth controller. Sonic's main gameplay gimmick is his speed. I don't know exactly how the folks at Sega looked at something like this and thought fastest thing alive, but if there's one thing that every Sonic fan seems to agree on, regardless of what era their allegiance lies, it's that they love Sonic's sense of speed. And what really sells it is the game's excellent physics system. Sonic gradually accelerates from walking speed to a brisk jog. If you let go of the D-pad, he'll take a second to slow to a stop. If you use the spin attack on an incline, Sonic will speed up, allowing you to curl around loop-de-loops and launch up into the air. Some zones utilize this mechanic more than others. While Green Hill Zone and Starlight Zone are more fast-paced and contain a lot of sloped platforms, Marble Zone and Labyrinth Zone are slower paced and tend to emphasize precision platforming and puzzle solving. For this reason, I imagine that Sonic 1 is probably most people's least favorite game in the classic series. Compared to Sonic 2, CD, and 3 and Knuckles, Sonic's speed ability can feel kind of underutilized. Because of that, Sonic 1 feels more like a traditional platformer than most games in the series. Personally, I don't mind that at all. As someone who more or less prefers the traditional platforming of Super Mario and Donkey Kong Country, I really get a kick out of Sonic 1's level design despite its smaller emphasis on speed. While Labyrinth Zone's slogging pace and obnoxious stage hazards may be somewhat tedious to go through, it's nothing that makes me want to shut the game off and go play something else. I also really enjoy the puzzle elements, which don't seem nearly as prominent in the other classic games. The point I'm trying to make here is that Sonic is a platforming series first, and a series about going fast second. If all we want is speed, then Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing is the best game in the series. Obviously, I think it's better for speed and platforming to be given equal attention and to complement each other, but if that can't happen for whatever reason, I'd prefer Sonic be slower paced and have good platforming than be lightning fast but hard to control or uninteresting to play. If I had to nitpick Sonic 1's level design, it does kind of annoy me that you have to backtrack to go up certain slopes in the level, but that's not really a big deal. Nevertheless, the mobile version does alleviate this minor hiccup somewhat by adding the spin dash move from Sonic 2. You can use this ability to skip past chunks of platforming, easily kill certain ground enemies, and to get up these hills without backtracking. And if you don't want to use it, you can turn it off in the options menu. The abundance of loop-de-loops and slopes aren't the only thing that's unique about Sonic's level design. In most classic platforming games like Mario, Mega Man, or Castlevania, the level design is pretty straightforward. Dodge all the enemies, don't fall into pits, kill the boss at the end, and you're golden. Sonic, on the other hand, often branches into multiple pathways that you can take to reach the end of a stage. To a lot of fans, this more non-linear level design is what really separates the Sonic series from the likes of Mario, and lifts it above and beyond most games in the genre. I am personally more ambivalent about it, though I do think Sonic 1 handles things relatively well. The level design in the classic sequels could get really labyrinthine and somewhat cluttered, but Sonic 1 keeps things relatively straightforward while still offering some alternate pathways for more explorative players. I'll dig into this topic a little more in the Sonic 2 review, but as far as Sonic 1 goes, the level design is pretty good. So, how about the difficulty? When I reviewed the classic Mario games about a year ago, I tried to be somewhat understanding of the design philosophy behind limited continues. I mean, it was the mid-80s after all. It's not like there was a big book of game design that taught developers how to properly scale and balance difficulty. Though I much prefer the infinite continues of Mario 3 onward, as well as the save features of the remakes, I'm willing to give the NES Mario 1 and Mario 2 a free pass for not including these things. Sonic 1, on the other hand, is a different story. By the time Sonic the Hedgehog came out in 1991, games like Super Mario Bros. 3, Castlevania, and Mega Man had figured out how to give players unlimited continues and still offer plenty of challenge. So the fact that Sega decided to stick to this obsolete model of game design for their killer app first-party release, when their rival mascot had abandoned this model several years ago, is just mind-boggling to me. I don't think that limited continues in and of themselves are inherently bad, and nor does it entirely ruin a game that contains them. I love the original Star Fox for the Super Nintendo, limited continues and all. Because it can be beaten in about half an hour, continues and extra lives are easy to come by, and because the game is designed in a way that rewards skill with the control scheme rather than blind memorization. These design choices may seem minor, but they go a long way in rounding out the difficulty and making things reasonably challenging and fun. The difficulty balancing in the Genesis versions of Sonic 1 and 2 is not nearly as sophisticated, and while these games are far from unbeatable, the difficulty balancing is still my single greatest complaint about the originals. Starting off the game, you get 3 lives. Lose them all, it's game over, and you're getting sent back to the title screen to start over from square one. You can get more lives from monitors or by collecting 100 rings, and there is a way to get continues that I'll be going over later, but collecting rings is no easy task. Rings double as Sonic's life bar. As long as Sonic is holding one, he can take damage without losing a life, but that also means he'll drop all of his rings in the process. So that means that if you have a high number of rings and an enemy or a stage hazard surprise motherfuckers you out of nowhere, well, you're not getting an extra life anytime soon. But that also means that it's pretty hard to get killed, because there are plenty of rings around to protect you. I guarantee that you'll very rarely get killed by an enemy, but this means that most of the time you'll be axed off by instant kill stage hazards such as crush deaths, drowning, or bottomless pits. Things that are frustrating to dodge or hard to predict. Things that most of the time feel like the game's fault rather than a lack of skill on your own part. How was I supposed to know that this hole in the ground was a bottomless pit and not a path forward? Bottomless pits don't belong in 2D Sonic, damn it. If you're gonna make a game where the levels are super tall, then you need to make it more obvious where the pits are. It takes a lot of memorization and trial and error to avoid some of this stuff. When I first set out to finish these games 4 years ago, I just couldn't seem to beat any of them for the life of me. In Sonic 1, I'd barely make it to the Frenzied Labyrinth Zone boss, hit myself on one of these wall spears or get nuked by a fireball, and that was it. Game over. And let me tell you folks, there is nothing more frustrating than finally making it to Starlight Zone, only to slip off a platform by accident, lose your last life, and get sent back to the title screen. And before someone mentions it in the comments, yes, I am aware that there is a stage select code, but like the Mario 1 continue code, I consider that cheating. And besides, the game should just have unlimited continues to begin with. Since my first successful playthrough, I've accumulated quite a bit of skill. I've memorized where all the surprise instant kill hazards are, and I've come to enjoy Sonic 1 quite a bit. but I will never forget the frustration I went through to beat this game for the first time. Another problem is that there is a pretty noticeable difficulty disparity between zones. Marble Zone is much more challenging than Springyard Zone, and Starlight Zone is both shorter and easier than Green Hill Zone. And some call me Johnny accuses Mario 3 of having schizophrenic difficulty. Ultimately, the Genesis version of Sonic 1 is very beatable. With enough practice and determination, you will complete this game. But if you're a noob to 2D Sonic, like I was 4 years ago, your first playthrough is going to be pretty rocky. But enough about that. Let's talk about the special stages. Oh boy! In my synopsis of the plot, I mentioned that Dr. Robotnik was searching for the Chaos Emeralds, the resident plot MacGuffins of the Sonic series. Most of the games involve the good doctor trying to collect them so he can either power a doomsday device or awaken some sealed evil in a can and use it to take over the world. Sonic, being the upstanding dude that he is, always tries to stop him. Chaos Emeralds are absconded in hidden bonus levels called special stages. If Sonic collects 50 rings, a giant special ring appears over the exit signpost. If Sonic jumps in, he'll be warped to a high-definition 16-bit rotating maze, where an emerald lies hidden somewhere. If you can find all 6 emeralds in their given stages, Sonic can put a stop to Robotnik's evil designs and unlock the true ending of the game. Most classicists seem to agree that special stages are a fun and enjoyable extension of the gameplay, and I've often heard classicists criticize 3D Sonic titles for not including them. So, what do I think? Well, first and foremost, special stages are totally optional. If you don't want to play them, you don't have to. And for that reason, I can enjoy the classic Sonic games overall irrespective of the special stages. That being said, I have never, and never will care for special stages. I love looking for bonus rooms and puzzle pieces in Donkey Kong Country. I love collecting star coins and red star rings. But I have never found special stages to be a fun and fulfilling part of the Sonic experience. Why is that? Where do I even begin? Getting into a special stage is a pain in the fucking ass. Finding 50 rings, especially when enemies or hazards have a tendency to fly on screen out of nowhere, is no small feat. There's nothing worse than getting hit right at the end of the stage and missing out on a shot for a Chaos Emerald. And what's also annoying is that Sonic is finicky about jumping into the special ring. If you take more than a second to jump in, Sonic will automatically run off screen. Why? That's so goddamn annoying, especially when your chances to enter the special stages are pretty limited to begin with. Special rings only appear in the first and second acts of each zone, except for the final one. That's 10 chances in total. So that means that if you don't get at least one Chaos Emerald by the time you reach Springyard Zone Act 2, you might as well hit reset because you're screwed. And then there's the stages themselves. You control Sonic in a rotating maze. You can make him jump with the buttons and move around with the D-pad, but you're subject to the gravity of the maze. Touching bumpers will bounce you in directions you don't want to go, touching these up and down buttons will make the maze go too fast or too slow, and these annoying fucking goal spheres will eject you from the stage with no option to try again. You'd think these goal spheres would be easy to avoid, but the bumpers will often knock you into them, or sometimes the stage will load and you'll fall straight down into them. To get at the emerald itself, you have to break open this obnoxious crystal barrier, which takes so long that you run the risk of falling into the goal spheres. There's no skill to these things, just pure dumb luck. You gotta hope that the game feels like letting you win, and most of the time it doesn't. But let's say that you actually do manage to get a Chaos Emerald. Well, don't get a game over, because if you do, you lose everything, and you'll have to start all over from square one. And after all the hell you have to go through to get these things, what do you get? A 15-second cutscene that's not even that different from the normal ending. Whoop-de-frickin'-do. And while getting the Chaos Emeralds themselves may be optional, first-time players are going to want to go into the special stages anyway. Why? Because collecting 50 rings in a special stage is the only way to score continues. If you want to stand any chance of beating this on your first playthrough, you're going to need every life you can get. I'm sorry, classicists, but the special stages in the Genesis version just suck. They're not difficult in a challenging, fun way. They're difficult in an arbitrary, frustrating way. And in the end, you're not even really well rewarded for your efforts. The mobile version makes some changes that serve to round out the difficulty balancing of the Genesis original, and even make the special stages somewhat worthwhile. First off, the game includes 4 save files, which autosave after you complete an act. Suddenly, falling into a bottomless pit by accident no longer seems so frustrating when getting a game over only means redoing the act you're playing. It's also perfect for playing on the airplane or on the bus or something. The save files also save your Chaos Emeralds, so you don't have to worry about losing them all if you get a game over. Once you've beaten the game, you're also given the ability to choose choose any level you want to hunt down the special stages you missed, much like in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. So that means that if you didn't get all the special stages in a single run through, you can just warp back to Green Hill Zone Act 1 and go for the outstanding emeralds. You can replay Green Hill Zone over and over again until you get it right. Then you just beat the final boss again and the good ending is yours. Getting all the Chaos Emeralds in the mobile version also unlocks Knuckles the Echidna as a fully playable character, which is a pretty good reward in my opinion. You can also unlock Tails Miles Power by beating the game normally, and you can even play the game as both Sonic and Tails at once. Classic Sonic purists will also be satisfied, as the mobile version includes a no-save mode, which plays exactly like the Genesis original. To put even more frosting on the cake, you can enter a special code in the no-save mode that allows you to get 7 emeralds and the possibility of Super Sonic. Yeah. Mind blown. With my thoughts on the gameplay more or less done, it's time for the truly unnecessary spoiler section.
Ah, spoiler alert!
After making his way through 5 zones of South Island, Sonic arrives at Robotnik's base of operations, Scrap Brain Zone, which is easily the toughest zone in the game. Bottomless pits adorn the bottom of the first act, killer buzzsaws will try to split you in half, and these annoying pig motherfuckers chuck bombs at you. As you make your way through the second act, you come across Baldy McNosehair, who sends you tumbling to the foundations of the base. Welcome to Labyrinth Zone Act 4, everyone, because everyone who played this game wanted to slog through 3 more minutes of spears, fireballs, and surprise motherfucker ball spikes. Eventually, Sonic makes it to the doctor's control room, and confronts him in the hopes of rescuing his animal buddies. And there aren't any rings. Luckily, the boss's attacks move in a clear and predictable pattern, so he's still pretty manageable. Unlike that other boss, after hitting the mech 8 times, the base self-destructs and the good doctor attempts to escape, only for Sonic to send him tumbling to his doom. Ugh, so satisfying. And with that, Sonic rescues his animal friends and returns to Green Hill Zone, his world at peace once again. All's well if it ends well, I suppose. So that was Sonic the Hedgehog. Well, laugh it up, Fuzzball, you scruffy-looking nerf hair. How the hell did he even get the emeralds anyway?
Fingers! 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 Fingers!
If you manage to get all the emeralds, Sonic will use the Chaos Emeralds to deface the wildlife of Green Hill Zone. Wow, that was so worth wasting my life on those special stages. Bravo, Classic Sonic team, bravo. Seriously, don't go for the emeralds in the Genesis version. It really is just a waste of time. So, Remake or Rebreak, which version of Sonic 1 is the better experience? The mobile version is an easy replace. A remake that is so much better than the original that there really is no reason to own the original unless you have a strong attachment to it. The mobile version of Sonic 1 is loyal to the Genesis original in every way possible, from the controls to the sound to the graphics to the level design, and plays as smoothly as ever. The save feature fixes the difficulty balancing problems of the original, making for an overall more entertaining experience that is well suited to classic Sonic newbies. The addition of HD widescreen, 60 FPS frame rate, the spin dash, a time trial mode, a playable Knuckles and Tails, and an improved special stage system collectively allow this masterfully designed remake to beat out the Genesis original. For those who want something more genuine to the Genesis version, you can always turn off the spin dash and play the no save mode. This is a remake that will satisfy newcomers and veterans alike. Do yourself a favor and buy it off of iTunes or the Play Store. It's only $3 or $4, you got nothing to lose and everything to gain. What about Sonic the Hedgehog 1 in general? Overall, it's a pretty fun game, and I can see why people at the time would latch onto it and want to see more. Of all the attempts by Nintendo's competitors to offer an alternative to Mario, Sega's literal new spin on the platforming genre is a welcome breath of fresh air. The graphics and art direction are full of color and cartoonish flair. The controls are solid and easy to learn. The bosses are a lot of fun, and the levels not only have a creative aesthetic but also combine solid platforming, puzzle solving, and the occasional burst of speed to deliver a varied and nuanced experience. Like the first Sly game, I also find that Sonic 1's short length gives it quite a bit of replay value. I have my share of nitpicks here and there, but Sonic 1 holds up pretty well, all things considered. Sure, the special stages may not be very much fun to play, no matter what version you're playing, but to the game's credit, if I don't want to do them, I don't have to. My only real complaint, again, is the lack of unlimited continues or a password system, and the mobile version fully addresses these complaints. Even so, the Genesis version's far from unbeatable. Your first playthrough will most likely end in a game over, but with some memorization and a little trial and error, it shouldn't take you more than a few playthroughs to beat. While I wouldn't call Sonic the Hedgehog as good as, say, Super Mario World, it's still a pretty fun title that's worth checking out if you're into classic platforming games, or want a good gateway game into the rest of the genre. To the modernists and Dreamcastians out there who've never finished a classic Sonic game in their lives, it's not a bad place to jump in, and I'd recommend you give it an honest try sometime. Not much else I can really say here. Join me next time when I review one of the fan favorite games in the series, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for Sega Genesis, along with its mobile phone remake for iOS and Android. Until then, I'm ExoParadigmGamer, and I hope you enjoyed the review.